Palais, Royale. Curious about this widely praised place, I began by observing everything. I saw a rather pretty garden, lanes lined with tall trees, a great many men and women walking to and fro, benches, chairs, which one may rent for a sou, SOU. Newspaper readers sitting in the shade, young ladies and gentlemen eating either alone or in company, and waiters hurrying up and down a small staircase hidden by an ardor, hidden by an arbor, ARBOR, a tree. I sat down at a table. A waiter appeared instantly and asked me what I wanted. I ordered a cup of chocolate and asked him if there was any news. He replied that the Dauphine had given birth to a prince. A priest sitting at a nearby table said to him, "You're mad. She gave birth to a princess." A third man came up and said, "I've just come back from Versailles, and the Dauphine hasn't given birth at all." He told me I seemed to be a foreigner, and when I told him I was Italian, he began to speak to me about the court, the city, the theater, and finally offered to accompany me everywhere. I thanked him, stood up, and left. The priest went with me and told me the names of all the ladies who strolled past. A young man met him. They embraced each other, and the priest introduced me to him as an expert on Italian literature. In less than a quarter of an hour, we became fast friends because we saw that we both had the same interests. He was a poet, and so was I. He was curious about Italian literature, and I was curious about French literature. We exchanged addresses and promised to visit each other. Signé, a play about Madame de Pompadour, was being given that evening at the Italian theater, and I went there early in order to have a good seat. As I was staring at the audience, a richly dressed man came up to me and asked me politely if I was a foreigner. After my affirmative reply, he asked me how I liked Paris. But just then, an enormous lady, covered with jewelry, entered the box next to mine. Her immense bulk impressed me, and I stupidly said to the gentleman, "Who's that fatso? Who's that fatso?" "She's the wife of this fat pig." "Oh, excuse me, Monsignor." But my fat friend had no need to excuse me, for, far from being angry, he was choking with laughter. I was nevertheless embarrassed to the point of despair. He finally left me, and a few moments later I saw him enter his box and speak to his wife. I was watching them out of the corner of my eye, not daring to look at them directly, when I saw the lady join her husband in hearty laughter. Their gaiety increased my embarrassment, and I had nearly decided to leave the theater when I heard him call out to me, Monsignor, Monsignor. I could not withdraw without being impolite, so I went over to their box. Then, with a serious expression, he asked me to excuse him for laughing so much and graciously invited me to have supper with them that evening. I thanked him warmly. During the performance, I learned that he was Monsignor de Beauchamp, the chief tax collector of France. As soon as the curtain went down, I gave my arm to Madame de Beauchamp, and the three of us went to their mansion in a superb carriage. The supper lasted until 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was taken home in their carriage. Their house remained open to me during my entire stay in Paris, and I must not neglect to say that it was very useful to me. To those who say that foreigners are bored in Paris for the first 2 weeks are right, because it takes time to make acquaintances. But I was lucky enough to make good ones within the first 24 hours, and I was therefore able to enjoy myself there. The next morning, Monsignor Patou, the young man I had met in the Palais Royale, came to take me for a promenade in the Tuileries, after which he took me to see a famous actress named Mademoiselle, beloved by all of Paris and a member of the Royal Academy of Music. She had 3 charming young children with her. I adore them, she said to me. They deserve it by their beauty, I replied, although each of them has a different expression. Of course, the eldest is the son of the Duke of Annecy, the second of Count Egmont, and the third of Monsignor Monsnroux. Oh, excuse me. I thought you were the mother of all 3. You were not mistaken. As she said this, she looked at Patou, and they both laughed, which informed me of my blunder. I was a newcomer and not yet accustomed to seeing women enjoy the privileges of men. If I had been better acquainted with the morals of the time, I would have known that such things were quite common, and that the rich noblemen who sowed their progeny in that manner always left their children in their mother's care and paid large sums for their upbringing. Consequently, the more children these ladies accumulated, the better their financial situation was. My inexperience was Parisian morality. My experience with Parisian morality sometimes led me into grave errors. One day, for example, when I was in the home of Lenné, ballet master of the opera, I saw 5 or 6 young girls of 13 or 14, all accompanied by their mothers and all endowed with that air of modesty which a good education gives. I said all sorts of flattering things to them, and they lowered their eyes when they answered me. When one of them complained of a headache, one of her companions said to her, "You must not have slept well last night." "Oh, it's not that. I think I'm pregnant." At this reply, so unexpected from a young girl whose age and expression made me judge her to be a virgin, I said, "I didn't know you were married." She looked at me in surprise for a moment, then turned to her friends, and they all began to laugh uproariously. I left them ashamed, both for them and for myself. And I promised myself that never again would I gratuitously impute virtue to a class of women in whom it is so rare. It is foolish to expect even modesty in the nymphs of that stage, for they take pride in having none at all. Petou introduced me to all the most celebrated courtesans of Paris. He loved the fair sex, but unfortunately he did not have a constitution like mine, and his love of pleasure cost him his life at an early age. If he had lived, he would have followed in the footsteps of Voltaire. But at the age of 30, he paid the fatal tribute to nature which no one can escape. The Comédie Française captivated me, and I went to it every day. Although there were sometimes less than 200 spectators, the plays were always perfectly performed. I came to Paris in time to meet Sarrazin, la Dangelville, la Duncénil, Préveille, and several other actresses who retired from the stage, lived on their pensions, and were still the delight of the company they received in their homes. I was always glad to see them, and they told me a number of extremely curious anecdotes. All the Italian actors in Paris were eager to entertain me in order to impress me with their affluence. The richest of them all was Pantalon, a notorious usurer. He asked me to dinner one evening, and his two daughters, Coraline and Camille, enchanted me. The first was kept by the Prince of Monaco, and the second was in love with Count Belfort. Coraline was less vivacious than Camille, but she was prettier. I began to pay court to her at odd hours of the day, like a man without consequence. But those hours also belonged to the prince, her official lover, so that he occasionally found me with her when he came to see her. The first few times I bowed to him and left, but eventually he asked me to stay, and we began having supper together. Their role was to listen to me, and mine was to eat and tell them stories. One morning the prince said to me as soon as I came in, "Ah, I'm glad to see you because I promised the Duchess of Beauchamp I'd take you to her house. Let's go." Now I was about to meet a duchess. Things were going well for me. We arrived at her house at 11 o'clock in the morning. Reader, if I were to be perfectly accurate, the picture I would paint of that lascivious shrew would horrify you. Imagine 60 winters accumulated on a face plastered with rouge, a pockmarked complexion, sunken cheeks, and features marked with all the ugly stigmata of debauchery. She was languidly stretched out on a sofa when I appeared, and she cried out with savage joy, "Oh, what a handsome boy! Prince, it was charming of you to bring him to me. Come sit beside me, my boy." I obeyed respectfully, but an overpowering odor of musk, which struck me as cadaverous, nearly turned my stomach. The infamous Duchess sat up, revealing a hideous bosom capable of putting the bravest of men to rot. The prince left us, pretending to have an appointment elsewhere, and told me he would send his carriage back for me. As soon as we were alone together, the painted skeleton put out her arm, and before I knew what was happening, she made me shudder by applying her clammy lips to my cheek. One of her hands wandered with the height of indecency, and she said to me, "Come, my boy, let me see if you have a nice, big." I resisted. "Don't be childish. Are you such a novice?" "No, madame. No, madame, but..." "What is it?" "I have..." "Oh, the scoundrel," she cried. "Just think what I was about to expose myself to." Taking advantage of the opportunity, I picked up my hat and fled, fearing that the porter might refuse to let me leave the house. I went to relate my adventure to Coraline. She laughed heartily and agreed with me that the prince had played a vile trick on me. She praised my presence of mind in pretending to have a disease, but she did not give me an opportunity to prove her that I had deceived the Duchess. My ardor for Coraline gradually cooled. 3 weeks after, 3 weeks after, I had stopped seeing her altogether. A Venetian musician named Guadagni, a handsome young man who had only the appearance of virility, aroused her curiosity and put an end to her affair with the prince when the latter caught them in the act. Louis XV, who was passionately fond of hunting, was in the habit of spending 6 weeks at the Fontainebleau every year. He was always back in Versailles by the end of November. This yearly sojourn cost him, or rather it cost France, 5 million francs. During those 6 weeks, Fontainebleau was much more animated than Paris. It was a good opportunity for me to become acquainted with the court, so I went there. The first time an opera was given, I had a seat directly below Madame de Pompadour's box. During the first act, I saw the famous Memoirs come on stage and utter such a loud and unexpected shriek that I believed her to be mad. I laughed spontaneously, having no idea that anyone might take it amiss. A decorated gentleman sitting beside Madame de Pompadour asked me curtly where I came from. I replied in the same tone, "From Venice." "I have been there," he said, and I laughed a great deal at the recitative of your operas. I laughed a great deal at the recitative of your operas. "I believe you, Monsignor, and I'm sure no one tried to prevent you from laughing." This somewhat sharp reply made Madame de Pompadour laugh, and she asked me if I was really from down there. "What do you mean by it? What do you mean by from down there?" "From Venice." "Venice, madame, is not down there, it's up there." This reply was found to be even more singular than the other, and everyone in the box began discussing whether Venice was down there or up there. I was apparently judged to be right, for no one attacked me again. The decorated gentleman, whom I did not recognize, was Marechal de Richelieu. The next day I went to court alone, and I saw Louis XIV going to Mass with the entire royal family, and all the ladies of the court, who surprised me by their ugliness. Louis XIV, however, had the most handsome face it is possible to imagine. No painter ever succeeded in rendering its expression. My brother, Francesco, the painter, came to Paris in the spring of 1751 and took lodgings in the same house with me. He began to work successfully for private individuals, but his main ambition was to present a painting before the Academy, and he studied seriously with that end in view. Madame Quinson, my landlady, had a 15-year-old daughter named Mimi, who often came to my room without being called. It did not take me long to notice that she was in love with me, and I would have felt ridiculous if I had revisited the advances of a vivacious and charming brunette. For the first 4 or 5 months, nothing serious took place between us, but one night I came in late and found her asleep in my bed. I undressed and lay down beside her. She left me at dawn. She had been gone less than 3 hours when a Nenya came to see me with a charming girl and asked to have breakfast with me. I found the girl quite worthy of breakfast, but since I needed rest, I asked them to leave after I had talked with them for an hour. A moment later, Madame Quinson came in with her daughter to make my bed. I put on my dressing gown and began writing. Oh, shameless hussies, exclaimed Madame Quinson. Who, madame? It's not hard to see what's happened, Monsignor. These sheets are ruined. I'm sorry, my dear lady, but change them and the damage will be undone. She left, muttering threats. If they ever come back here, I'll make them wish they hadn't. Mimi stayed behind with me. I reproached her for her carelessness. She answered, laughing, that love had sent those two women to protect the innocent. From then on, Mimi came to share my bed whenever she felt so inclined, unless I sent her away. She always returned to her room the following morning without difficulty. After 4 months, however, she announced to me that our secret would soon be revealed. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, but there's nothing I can do about it. We'll have to think of something. Think about it then. What do you expect me to think of? No matter what happens, I've made up my mind not to think about it. Toward the 6th month, her swelling became so pronounced that her mother, unable to doubt the evidence, flew into a rage and ordered her to name the father. She named me, and she may have been telling the truth. Armed with this discovery, Madame Quinson stormed into my room, showered me with insults, and finally informed me that I would have to marry her daughter. Knowing what to expect from then on, and wishing to cut her short, I told her I already had a wife in Italy. Well then, she said, why did you make my daughter pregnant? I assure you that wasn't my intention, and what makes you so sure I'm the father? She told me so herself, and she's sure of it. I congratulate her on her certainty, but as for me, madame, I'm prepared to swear to you that I'm not sure. She left my room uttering curses and threats, and the next day I was summoned to appear before the local police commissary. Madame Quinson already there when I arrived. After a few preliminary questions, the commissary asked me if I admitted having wronged Mademoiselle Quinton as her mother charged. I haven't wronged her daughter in any way, I replied. She says you've made her pregnant. That's possible, but it's not certain. Why did you give her... What did you give her to seduce her? Nothing, because it was she who just seduced me, which is always easy for pretty women to do. Was she a virgin? I wasn't curious about that, so I couldn't tell you. Her mother is requesting damages, and the law demands that you pay her. I owe her mother nothing, and I'll obey the law when I'm convinced I've violated them. I'm sure you're already convinced, because you cannot deny that a man breaks the laws of society when he impregnates an honorable girl in the house where he lives. That's true if the girl's mother is deceived, but if she sends her daughter into a young man's bedroom, is not it natural to assume that she's willing to accept the possible consequences? She sent her to you only to serve you. She served me the way I served her. And if her mother sends her to me tonight, I'll serve her again as well as I can. You can say what you like, but you'll pay the damages. I'll say only what I believe to be right, and I won't pay anything because it's impossible that I should have to pay damages when I haven't broken any law. If I am ordered to do so, I'll appeal my case until I'm given justice because, Monsignor, I know that I will never be so foolish or so cowardly as to refuse the caresses of a pretty woman who comes into my own bedroom to provoke me, especially when I have every reason to believe that she has come there with her mother's consent. I signed my declaration and left. The next day I was called before the police lieutenant, along with Mademoiselle, Quinson, along with Madame Quinson. He acquitted me after hearing both sides of the case. This, however, did not prevent me from yielding to Mimi's tears and agreeing to pay the expenses of her delivery. She gave birth to a boy who was placed in a foundling home to the profit of the nation. Toward the middle of August, my brother and I left Paris. I had spent 2 years in that superb city. My pleasures there were many, and the only unpleasantness I had experienced was that of occasionally running short of money. We set out for Dresden by way of Metz, Mainz, and Frankfurt. Toward the end of the same month, we arrived in Dresden, where my mother gave me an affectionate welcome. My brother spent 4 years there, constantly occupied with the study of his art. He did not return to Paris until he was convinced that he would be able to confront the critics with success. There was nothing extraordinary about the life I led in Dresden until the end of the Carnival of 1753. To please the actors and actresses there, especially my mother, I wrote a tragic comedy play, a parody of Racine's Les Frères Ennemis. Les Freresennemis. It made the king laugh heartily, and he gave me a magnificent present to show his appreciation. I left the city a short time afterward. My sojourn in Dresden was marked by an amorous souvenir of which I rid myself, as usual, by adhering to a strict regimen for 6 weeks. It has often occurred to me that I have spent the greater part of my life trying to catch a disease, and then, after attaining this goal, trying to cure myself of it. I have been equally successful in both enterprises, and now that I enjoy perfect health in that respect, I suffer from no longer being able to make myself ill again. Old age forces me to be healthy in spite of myself. The disease in question, one second. Which we Italians stupidly call the French disease, when we could rightfully claim the honor of being the first to import it, does not shorten life, although it does leave indelible marks of its passage. Its scars, less honorable perhaps than those won on the field of battle, are acquired with pleasure and ought never to be regretted. After staying in Prague for 2 or 3 days, I arrived in Vienna for the first time in my life. I was 28 years old, and when supplied with possessions, although somewhat short of money, which obliged me to moderate my spending until the arrival of a bill of exchange from Signor Bragadino. Everything in Vienna was beautiful. There was a great deal of luxury, but the Empress's bigotry made it extremely difficult to enjoy the pleasures of love, especially for foreigners. A legion of vile spies, who were decorated with the lofty title of Commissioners of Chastity, were the merciless persecutors of all amorous women. Whenever a young woman went into a house, the spy who had followed her would wait for her at the door and stop her to question her where she came out. If the poor girl seemed embarrassed, if she hesitated in answering his questions, or if he was not satisfied with her answers, he would take her off to jail. After first relieving her of all the money and jewels she had on her, which she could never hope to recover. In this way, Vienna was a den of privileged thieves. The only way a girl could avoid being molested in the street was to walk with her head bowed and a rosary in her hand. This prevented the spies from arresting her without evidence, for it was possible that she was on her way to church, and in that case the Empress would have had the Commissioner of Chastity hanged. These scoundrels made it very difficult for foreigners to stay in Vienna, because it was difficult to satisfy even the smallest of needs without running the risk of being harassed by them. One day, as I was standing beside a wall in a narrow street, I was surprised to hear a shabbily dressed individual in a round wig tell me that if I did not go off to finish elsewhere, he would have me arrested. And why, if you please? I asked. Because in that house to your left, there's a woman who may see you. I looked up and saw, on the 5th floor, the face of a woman who, if she had had a telescope, might have been able to tell whether I was a Jew or a Christian. I laughingly obeyed. I related the incident everywhere I went, but no one seemed surprised because such things happened 100 times a day. I left Vienna by stagecoach, and on the 4th day I slept in Dresden. The following day I embarked for Venice and arrived there 2 days before Holy Thursday. After my years of absence, it was a great pleasure for me to embrace my lovable protector, Signor Bragadino, and his 2 inseparable friends who were happy to see me in perfect health. Chapter 9. I returned to my native city with that delightful feeling which any sensitive person experiences when he revisits the places where he received his first lasting impressions. I had acquired a certain amount of experience. I was acquainted with the laws of honor and politeness. I felt superior to nearly all my equals, and I was eager to take up my old habits again. This time, however, I intended to behave more methodically and prudently. When I entered my study, I saw with pleasure that everything was exactly as I had left it. The thick layer of dust with which my papers were covered proved that no profane hand had disturbed them. 2 days after my arrival, I went out to accompany the Bucentoro, 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 the ship on which the Doge performs the traditional ceremony of marrying, the Adriatic Sea, Adriatic Sea, I learned, however, that bad weather had forced the postponement of the wondrous wedding until the following Sunday. Signor Bragadino was leaving for Padua the next day, and I accompanied him there. The following Saturday, I took a stage coach back to Venice. If I had left Padua 2 minutes earlier or later, everything that has happened to me since would have been quite different, and my destiny, if it is true that it depends on circumstances, would have taken another turn entirely. The reader may judge for himself. Having left Padua at that fateful moment at Royale, I saw a cabriolet approaching swiftly from the opposite direction. Inside it were a very pretty woman and a man in a German uniform. It was several paces away from me. The cabriolet overturned in the direction of the river, and the woman, having fallen over the man, was in danger of rolling into the Brenta. I leapt out of my stagecoach without giving it time to stop and ran to her assistance, repairing with a chaste hand the disorder of her clothes. Her companion picked himself up uninjured and ran over to us. The lady was just sitting up, less embarrassed by her fall than by the indiscretion of her skirts, which had revealed everything that an honorable woman never shows to strangers. In her expression of gratitude, which continued during the whole time her driver and mine were engaged in righting the cabriolet, she repeatedly called me her savior and her guardian angel. When the damage had been repaired, we went our separate ways, she toward Padua and I toward Venice, where I arrived just in time to go to the opera. The next day, I put on my mask and went off to follow the Bucentoro, which, favored by fine weather, was to be towed out to the Lido. For the great and ridiculous ceremony. This function, not only rare but unique, depends on the courage of the admiral of the dockyard, who must guarantee on pain of death that the weather will be constantly good, for the slightest wind could upset the vessel and drown the Doge, along with the illustrious Parisians, the ambassadors at the Papal Nuncio, who guarantees the virtue of this burlesque wedding, which Venetians revere to the point of superstition. To make matters worse, the tragic accident would make all of Europe laugh. Everyone would be sure to say that the Doge of Venice had finally consummated his marriage. Doge, saying Doge of Venice had finally consummated his marriage. I was having a cup of coffee in the Piazza di San Marco when a masked woman provocatively tapped me on the shoulder with her fan. Not recognizing her, I paid little attention to her. After finishing my coffee, I walked over to where Signor Bragadino's gondola was, waiting for me. Near the bridge, I saw the same masked woman. I approached her and asked her why she had struck me with her fan. To punish you for not recognizing me after having saved my life. I guessed that it was the pretty woman I had assisted the day before on the bank of the Brenta. I asked her if she was going to follow Bucentoro. I'd like to, she said, if I had a safe gondola. I offered her mine, which was quite large, and after consulting the masked man who was with her, she accepted my invitation. As we were preparing to enter my gondola, I asked them to remove their masks, but they told me they had reasons for wishing to remain unknown. We followed the Bucentoro. Sitting beside the lady, I took a few liberties with her, but she disconcerted me by changing her seat. When we returned to Venice, the officer invited me to have dinner with them. I accepted, for I wanted to become acquainted with the lady. What I had seen of her when she fell from the cabriolet made my curiosity quite natural. The officer went off to order our dinner. As soon as I was alone with her, I told her I was in love with her, that I had a box at the opera which I would place at her disposal, and that if she would give me hope that I was not wasting my time or wasting time, I would serve her during the entire carnival. If you intend to be cruel to me, I said, please tell me so frankly. What kind of a woman do you take me for? A charming one? Whether you're a princess or the lowest of commoners, today I ask you for nothing but a word of encouragement. Give it to me and you'll see me modest, submissive, and discreet. Restrain yourself. The officer was waiting for us at the door of the inn. As soon as we were in our private room, she took off her mask. She looked even prettier than the day before. I still had to learn for the sake of form and ceremony, whether the officer was her husband, her lover, her relative, or her procurer. Accustomed to having adventures, I wanted to know the nature of the one I had just begun. We sat down to the table. Their manner obliged me to proceed with caution. It was to the officer that I offered my box at the opera, and he accepted it. After the performance, I took them to supper at an inn, and then to their house in my gondola. On the way, aided by the darkness of the night, I obtained, from her all the favors a lady can discreetly grant in the presence of a third person. The next day, the officer came to see me. After an exchange of conventional greetings, I asked him to tell me who he was. My name is Pietro C., he said. My father is rich, but we are estranged from each other. The lady you saw me with has separated from her husband because of me, and it was because of her that I quarreled with my father. I wear this uniform because I hold a captain's commission in the Austrian army, but I have never been on active duty. I'm in charge of supplying oxen to the Venetian state. I buy them from Styria, 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 and Hungary. This gives me an income of 10,000 florins a year. But for the moment, I am in a difficult situation because one of my creditors has gone bankrupt. I first heard of you 4 years ago, and I wanted to meet you then. I think it must have been Providence that brought us together the day before yesterday. I want to ask you to do me an important favor that will unite us in close friendship. Help me without taking any risk by accepting these 3 bills of exchange. I'll put up a year's shipment of oxen as security. Astonished that he should think me capable of being taken in by such a proposition, I did not hesitate to tell him that I would never accept it. He redoubled his eloquence to persuade me, but I embarrassed him by telling him I was surprised that he had given me preference over all his other acquaintances when he had known me only 2 days. Since I knew you were an intelligent man, he said brazenly, I was sure you'd see the advantages of my offer. You must have changed your mind by now, and you'll no doubt take me for a fool when I tell you that I'd consider myself your dupe if I accepted your offer. He apologized and left after giving me his address, which was a tacit invitation to return his visit. Disgusted at having been singled out by him, I no longer had any desire to try my luck with his mistress, for it seemed to me that the couple had decided to make me their dupe. I ought to have let the matter drop. But the next day, judging that a social call would have no consequences, I went to see him. He gave me a very cordial reception and then began to speak about his proposition again, which annoyed me greatly. If you'll accept these 3 bills of exchange, he said, I'll make you a partner in my business. My only reply was to ask him never to mention it to me again for the rest of my life. I was about to take leave of him when he told me he wanted to introduce me to his mother and sister. He left the room and returned with them a few moments later. His mother was a woman with an air of simple respectability, but his sister, Katerina, was a model of beauty. I was dazzled by her. Several minutes later, the overly trusting mother withdrew and left me alone with her daughter. It took her less than half an hour to captivate me. Her quick mind, her natural and elevated sentiments, her gay and innocent vivacity. In short, that combination of beauty, intelligence, and innocence, which has always exercised absolute power over me. All these things made me a slave to the most perfect woman it is possible to imagine. And yet, I did not praise her beauty or tell her how interested I was in her. because I had lied on this point to so many other women that I was afraid she might be suspicious of me. I left the house sad and pensive. I decided never to see her again because I felt that I would be unable to sacrifice my freedom to her by asking for her hand in marriage, even though I judged that we were made for each other. 2 days later, I met Pietro in the street. He told me his sister no longer spoke of anything but me. She'd be a good match for you, he said, because she'll have a dowry of 10,000 ducats. Come to see me tomorrow and we'll have coffee with her and my mother. I promised myself never to set foot in his house again, but I did not keep my word. A man easily persuades himself to break his promise in such cases. I spent 3 hours in conversation with the charming Katerina, more madly in love with her than ever. Before leaving her, I told her I envied the fate of the man lucky enough to have her for his wife. This compliment, the first of its kind she had ever received, made her beautiful face turn scarlet. As I was leaving the house, I began to examine the nature of my feelings for her, and I was frightened by them, because with her I was unable to act either as an honorable man or as a libertine. I did not think I could bring myself to marry her, and yet it seemed to me that I would have stabbed anyone who advised me to seduce her. I needed to distract myself, so I went off to gamble. Gambling is sometimes an excellent sedative for love. My luck was good, and I went home with a purse full of gold. The next day, Pietro came to tell me joyfully that his mother had given his sister permission to go to the opera with him, that Katerina was delighted because she had never been there before, and that I could meet them somewhere outside their house if I wished. Does your sister know you're inviting me? Yes, and she's looking forward to seeing you. And does your mother know about it? No, but she won't be angry when she finds out because she has great respect for you. The scoundrel no longer spoke to me about his bills of exchange, seeing that I had stopped courting his mistress and that I was in love with his sister. He had conceived the noble idea of selling her to me. I pitied the mother and sister who trusted such an individual, but I did not have enough virtue to refuse his invitation. I even convinced myself that since I was in love with her, it was my duty to accept it in order to save her from some worse pitfall. Or for if I refused, he might find someone less scrupulous than I, and that the idea was unbearable to me. And that idea was unbearable to me. I reserved a box at the opera and met them before the performance began. Afterward, I took them to an inn for supper. I hardly spoke during the meal, for I was sick with love and in a state of morose excitement, so strong that it could not last for long. After supper, Pietro told his sister I was in love with her and that I would feel relieved if she would allow me to kiss her. Her only reply was to turn to me with laughing lips, which seemed to demand a kiss. I was burning with desire, but I had such respect for that innocent and naive creature that I kissed her only on the cheek. "What a kiss!" exclaimed Pietro. "Come now, give her a real one." I did not make a move. The impudent instigator annoyed me. Katerina turned her face away from me and said seriously, "Don't press him. I'm not lucky enough to please him." This expression alarmed my love, and I was no longer able to control myself. "What?" I cried fervently. "You don't think you please me? If it takes only a kiss to convince you, I hope you'll receive it with all the emotion I feel when I give it to you." I took her in my arms and gave her a long, ardent kiss. She drew back from me, astonished at having discovered my love for her in such a way. As her brother applauded me, she put on her mask again in order to conceal her emotion. He and I also put on our masks, and I took them home. The next day, Pietro came to see me with an air of triumph to tell me that his sister had told her mother we were in love with each other, and that if she had ever married, she could be happy with no one but me. "I adore your sister," I said to him. "But do you think your father would allow her to marry me?" "I don't think so, but he's old, and in the meantime, you can love each other. My mother has given her permission to go to the opera with us again tonight. My mother has given her permission to go to the opera with us again tonight. All right then, we'll go. I'm forced to ask you to do me a small favor. I'm at your disposal. I know where I can buy some excellent Cyprian wine at a very good price. I can have a barrel of it for a note payable in 6 months. I'm sure I can resell it at a profit, but the dealer wants a second party to guarantee the note. Will you co-sign it with me?" "Gladly." I signed without hesitation. For where is the man in love who would refuse such a favor to someone in a position to avenge his refusal by destroying his happiness? We made an appointment to meet each other that afternoon. As soon as we were together, Pietro told me he was expected elsewhere and left me alone with his sister, saying that he would join us later at the opera. When he was alone, I told Katerina that we could ride in a gondola until it was time for the opera to begin. "Why don't we go to a garden in Duchess instead?" she asked. "That's an excellent idea." We took a gondola and went to a garden which I rented for the rest of the day. No one else was allowed to enter it until we left. The charming Katerina was wearing only a taffeta skirt and blouse, but she was ravishing in that light costume. My amorous eyes pierced those veils, and my soul saw her naked. I sighed with desire, self-control, and sensuality. When my young companion, nimble as a doe, found herself on a lawn, she began to run in all directions, giving free rein to her gaiety. She laughed when she saw me contemplating her in ecstatic silence. A short time later, she challenged me to a race. The game pleased me, and I accepted, but I wanted to interest her with a wager. "The loser," I said, "will have to do whatever the winner tells him to." "All right." We agreed on the goal and began the race. I was sure I could win, but I wanted to lose in order to see what she would tell me to do. I regulated my pace so that she reached the goal before I did. As she was catching her breath, she decided on the task she would assign to me. She hid behind a tree and then ordered me to find her ring. She had hidden it somewhere on herself, thereby placing her entire body at my disposal. I was delighted by this, for I saw clearly that her intentions were not entirely innocent, and yet I felt that I must not go too far because her naive confidence needed encouragement. We sat down on the grass. I searched her pockets, the folds of her blouse and skirt, her shoes, and finally her garters, which were fastened above her knees. Not having found the ring yet, I continued my search. The reader has no doubt guessed that I suspected a charming hiding place in which she had concealed it, but I gave myself 1,000 pleasures before arriving there. I finally found the ring between the two most beautiful guards ever fashioned by nature. I was so deeply moved as I took it out that my hand was trembling visibly. "Why are you trembling?" she asked. "I'm trembling with pleasure at having found the ring, because you hid it so well." A young and innocent girl who has not yet loved does not know the violence of desire. When instinct makes her fall in love for the first time, she believes the man she loves to be worthy of her complete confidence, and she believes that she can make him love her only by trusting him without reserve. We strolled around the garden until evening, when we went to the opera. After the second ballet, Pietro came into our box with his mistress and invited us to have supper with them in his casino. As soon as the two ladies had taken off their masks, they embraced each other, and Pietro's mistress showered his sister with compliments. But I could see that, in spite of all her artfulness, I could see that, in spite of all her artfulness, the older woman could not completely conceal her spite, as she saw the superiority of the charms I had preferred to her own. After supper, Pietro kissed his mistress and urged me to imitate his example with his sister. I told him I would take such liberties with Katerina only when I had won her heart, because I was sincerely in love with her. He laughed, stood up from the table, pulled his mistress from her seat, and threw himself onto a sofa with her. When the scene became lascivious, I placed myself in such a way as to hide them from Katerina and gently drew her over to the window. I was unable, however, to prevent her from seeing the shameless couple in a mirror, and her face turned scarlet. After his brutal exploit, the impudent Pietro came over and embraced me. and his brazen companion told Katerina she was sure she had seen nothing. Katerina replied modestly that she did not know what she could have seen, but a glance she shot at me enabled me to guess everything she felt. As for what I felt, the reader can imagine it for himself if he knows the human heart. How could I bear such a scene in the presence of an innocent girl when I had to struggle against my own desires in order not to take advantage of her? Pietro believed he had given me a great demonstration of his friendship, completely disregarding his mistress's honor and his sister's modesty. I do not know how I had the strength to keep from strangling him. When he came to see me the next day, I overwhelmed him with reproaches, and he tried to excuse himself by saying that he would never have done it if he had not been convinced that I had already done the same thing with his sister in private. He told me that if I would meet him in the same place as before, he would bring Katerina to me and leave us in complete freedom. I kept the appointment, and burning with love, I had a presentiment of what was going to happen. I reserved a box at the opera, but we went to our garden to wait for evening. Since it was a holiday, there were several small groups of people at separate tables, and not wishing to become involved with anyone, we decided to remain in a private apartment which we rented for ourselves. We had 7 hours before us, and Katerina told me we would not be bored. She took off her mask and sat on my lap, telling me I had finished the conquest of her heart by the way I had spared her feelings after the horrible supper with her brother and his mistress. Did you see what he did to her when she got on top of him, straddling him? She asked. I could only see them in the mirror, but I had a good idea of what they were doing. Weren't you afraid I might treat you the same way? No, not at all. How could I be afraid, knowing how much you love me? We are saving ourselves for marriage, aren't we? We'll love each other forever. I'm ready to marry tomorrow. And if you want me, that is, I'm ready to marry tomorrow if you want me to. Once we are married, my father will have to give his consent. Yes, but I still want to ask his permission in advance. We'll be married within 8 or 10 days. He'll say I'm too young, and he may be right. No, I'm young, but not too young, and I'm sure I'm able to be your wife. I was a furnace of desire, and it was becoming impossible for me to resist the flame that was consuming me. My darling, are you sure I love you? I asked. Do you think I'm capable of deceiving you? Are you certain you'll never regret being my wife? I'm more than certain, my love. Then let's become man and wife this very moment. God alone will be the witness of our vows, and He knows the purity of our intentions. We'll strengthen our bonds with your father's consent and the ceremonies of religion as soon as we can. In the meantime, be mine. Give yourself to me completely. Do whatever you like with me, my love. I promise you before God to be your faithful wife as long as I live. After kissing her tenderly, I went to the mistress of the casino and told her not to bring our supper to us until we called her. During this time, my charming Katerina had laid down on the bed fully dressed. I told her that veils were displeasing to love, and in less than a minute I had transformed her into a modern Eve, beautiful and naked, as though she had just left the hands of the supreme artist. Her skin, soft as satin, was dazzlingly white, which enhanced the beauty of her superb jet black hair. Her slender waist, her well-rounded hips, her perfectly molded breasts, her pink lips, her large eyes in which both gentleness and the spark of desire were visible. Everything about her presented to my avid gaze the perfection of a Venus enchanted by the added attractiveness which modesty gives to the charms of a beautiful woman. In an ecstasy of joy, I was beginning to fear that my good fortune might not be real, or that I might not be able to make my happiness perfect by bringing it to a climax, when Katerina broke the seriousness of the moment by asking me, "Is it a rule that the husband must leave his clothes on?" "No, my dearest angel, and if there were such a rule, I'd consider it too barbarous to be obeyed." I threw off all my clothes in an instant, and then it was her turn to abandon herself to all the impulses of her instincts and curiosity, for everything about me was new to her. Katerina gave herself to me heroically, because the intensity of her love made even her pain sweet to me. After 3 hours of ecstasy, I got up and ordered supper. The meal was frugal but delicious. Frugal but delicious. We looked at each other without speaking, for how could we have expressed what we felt? The hostess came in to ask us if we wanted anything else and whether we were going to the opera. "Have you ever been there?" I asked. "Never. It's too expensive for people like us. My daughter is so curious about it that, God forgive me, I think she'd give up her virtue for the pleasure of going just there once." "That would be a high price to pay," said Katerina, laughing. "Could not we make her happy more cheaply?" "That's just what I was thinking," I said. "Let's give her the key to our box." "Take this and go to the opera tonight," said Katerina, handing the key to the hostess. "And tell your daughter to keep her maidenhead for something better. Here are 2 sequins to make your evening even more enjoyable," I added. The good woman, amazed at the generosity of her guests, ran off to find her daughter, while we rejoiced at having made it necessary for us to go back to bed. The hostess returned with her daughter, a pretty blonde who insisted on kissing the hands of her benefactress. "She is going to leave immediately with her sweetheart," said her mother. But I won't let her go alone with him. I'm going too. When you come back, I said, tell the gondolier to wait for us and take us back to town. What? You're going to stay here till we come back? Yes. You were married only today. Today? God bless you. Stepping over to the bed to straighten it up, she saw the undeniable proof of Katerina's virtue and embraced her with spontaneous joy. She then began to preach a sermon to her daughter, showing her the honorable marks that you don't see after many weddings nowadays. Lowering her beautiful blue eyes, the daughter replied that she was sure the same marks would be seen after her wedding. When they had gone, we went back to bed and spent the next 4 hours in delicious rapture. Exhausted with happiness and pleasure, we were falling asleep when the hostess came in to tell us that the gondola was waiting for us. She went off to make us some coffee while her daughter helped Katerina to dress herself. From time to time, the younger blonde looked at me in such a provocative manner that I decided she must have had more experience than her mother supposed. As we were drinking our coffee, I told our hostess to prepare a good dinner for us the next day. We then went out to the gondola and returned to Venice. Dawn was breaking when we left each other. We were happy, satisfied, and certain that we were indissolubly married.